So now we have had a brief overview of the demand side of the energy system. In this video, we will begin to take a deeper dive into the supply side. So far, we have talked about final energy consumption, the energy that is going to the consumers in industry, transport and buildings. But we have another important concept, that is total energy supply. Total energy supply is the energy as we extract it from nature. In between energy supply and final consumption, we have these conversions like electricity production, oil refineries and others. Total energy supply is of course substantially higher than final energy consumption because of these conversion losses. In the end, most of the primary fossil fuels are combusted and lead to CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. Here we are going to see how energy consumption and economic development are related. In general, economic development will lead to higher energy consumption. All activities we pursue, whether it be producing steel or taking care of people in a hospital, they all need energy. So the more economic activity you have, the more energy you use. We can see this trend clearly in a country for which we have lots of data, the US. In this graph, you see on the horizontal axis the gross domestic product, or GDP per capita, and on the vertical axis the energy consumption per capita. You see, throughout most of the period from 1800 to the 1970s, there was a strong relation between energy use per capita and GDP per capita. But we see this has leveled off, and for a long period energy consumption has in fact been relatively stable. There are several causes for this. Firstly, because as countries develop, their economies tend to evolve away from energy-intensive industrial activities and instead towards less energy-intensive industries and to the service sector. Another cause is that improvements in energy efficiency became more important after the 1970s. Industrial processes, appliances and buildings all became more energy efficient. This recent trend of stabilizing energy use can also be observed for other countries. You see for the UK and Japan similar developments. For countries like India and China, the same trend is expected. However, they are still in an earlier stage of development. In general, if you want to explain how energy use is developing, there are always three factors. The first factor is a question of how much do you do, or the volume. For a country, the total GDP could serve as an indicator for this. The second factor is what do you do? This is a question of whether in your country the emphasis is on industrial manufacturing, which is more energy intensive, or a service sector, which is less energy intensive. It also makes a difference whether you have heavy industrial processes like steel and cement production, or light industrial processes like the production of cars or machinery. And finally, the third factor is a question of how do you do it? How efficient are things done? How much energy do you use per unit as activity? We call this energy efficiency. These three factors, volume, structure and efficiency, together determine how much energy society is using. Now we will look where all this energy comes from. You see here the energy sources that we use for the world. Oil is still the most important energy source that we are using. It was really dominant 50 years ago, but it is still very important. Coal is also important, especially in some countries like China and India. Also, you see reflected here the growth in China between 2000 and 2010, which has led to a growth in coal use. Natural gas was relatively small in the 1970s, but has since become a very important energy source. Nuclear energy and renewables have also grown significantly, but their shares in total energy use are still relatively modest. We may also dive a little bit deeper into the sources of electricity, because this will be of particular importance in a world that might be increasingly served by electricity, as we will see later. The breakdown of electrical energy sources is completely different to the graph seen previously. For electricity production, oil is not very important. Oil is mainly used in transport and some industry processes, but for electricity production, coal is the most important source. Second is natural gas. Hydropower and nuclear energy have also substantial shares. New renewable sources are currently relatively small, but as you see, they are growing rapidly. As we will see later, renewable energy will play a critical role in developing a climate-friendly energy system. But what is the current status? Here we explore the role that renewable energy sources currently play. First, we see again that fossil fuels dominate the global energy system, with a share in the contribution to final consumption of about 80%. The contribution of so-called modern renewable energy sources in 2019 was 11%. A substantial part of this is the so-called traditional use of biomass. This entails the use of wood, dung, and other combustible material, especially for cooking. In many rural areas in Africa and Asia, this is still the main source of energy. But how are the so-called modern renewables doing? Here we see the details. Hydropower has already been a source of electricity for a long time. The same is valid for biomass for heating purposes. The newer renewables like wind energy, solar energy, and transportation biofuels still make a very modest contribution. But the good news is they are rapidly growing.